like it. Welcome back to a new episode of Podcast on the Brink. It's Tuesday, October 22nd. Before we get to this week's episode of Podcast on the Brink, I wanted to quickly tell you that this episode is brought to you by our friends at Visit Bloomington, also a proud partner of Indiana University Athletics. Right now, Visit Bloomington is giving you and one friend the chance to score free Indiana Hoosier basketball tickets. Go to visitbloomington.com/contests and enter the IU men's basketball giveaway. The winners will also receive a free gift card to Buccetto's Pizza and Pasta. The website, once again, is visitbloomington.com/contests. Terms and conditions apply. See site for details. This week's episode of Podcast on the Brink, first-time guest on the show, but you all know him if you follow college basketball at all. He's Jon Rothstein, college basketball insider. Does a lot of work for CBS Sports, also FanDuel. Jon, long overdue. Welcome to your debut here on Podcast on the Brink.
Great to be with you, Alex. Excited for another great season of college basketball, and great to finally connect with you, man.
So we had a little delay in today's recording, and it was fascinating to me as you know, you break all this college hoops news. I'm just curious from a journalism perspective, what's it like kind of being always on 24/7? And we saw Woj kind of step away from the business.
Yeah,
I talked about wanting to kind of get his regular life back, but you're kind of in that rat race. What's that like for you on a day-to-day basis?
You know, I think the perspective changes as you get older. I think college basketball is really unique, and I know the sport has changed a lot with obviously the transfer portal and NIL contracts and all that stuff, but there's so many different layers to the coverage. For obviously professional leagues like the NBA or NFL or Major League Baseball, so much of it is transactional based. And I don't know if you feel this way. I don't follow really any other sports other than college basketball. I am tunnel vision 365. But I find, just from talking to friends and stuff like that, the stuff that happens off the court in the NBA and the potential trade rumors and potential free agency things, that's much more interesting than the games itself at the professional level. So I think in college basketball, there's so many different layers to covering it. And what I mean by that is there the news aspect of things? Do we want to know what players are going where? Do we want to know if there's going to be coaching changes? Absolutely. Do we want to know if there's going to be scheduling news? Absolutely. But there's also different areas of intrigue in the sense of the game. I mean, think about how compelling each college basketball game and how unpredictable it is. Think about, obviously, the trends that we see in the sports with bigger conferences now. How many teams are going to get into the NCAA tournament? How would a bracket be projected if you were trying to project the bracket? So I think there's so many layers to covering college basketball. You know, it really puts it in a different realm. It's why I love my job so much, because I think if you're a non-player, you're a non-coach. And, you know, one of my mentors is Frank Isola, who, you know, covered the Knicks for a long time for the Daily News. You see him now on Around the Horn all the time. And he told me, he goes, if you cover the sport as a non-player, as a non-coach, you have to give yourself, obviously, an angle with news, with insight that a former player or a former coach can't have, because especially if you're in a television setting like I am, you have to bring that angle. You should never turn on a studio show and see me talking about his own defense. That's not why I'm there. But I also think there is an insight and there's also a passion for the game, which, you know, our good friend Dick Vitale has shown for 50 years. And we all wish, you know, Dick the best because we love him in his fight against cancer. But I think that's also something, at least I know I have, and I think you do too, that we genuinely love college basketball, the pageantry, the unpredictability. Alex, I remember, you know, getting ready. I think this was the Tuesday of championship week last week. And, you know, on CBS Sports Network, we have all these, you know, championship games leading up to Selection Sunday. And the Tuesday of championship week, you know, I was getting ready to go to the studio. We had that night, I think we had the CAA tournament title game and the Summit League title game. So we were, you know, crowning two bids on our air. And as I'm getting ready, I'm watching the Tuesday games on the ACC tournament. You know, they're up on my TV. And Louisville's beating NC State. at the half on Tuesday of the ACC tournament. So like you're getting dressed and you're like, wow, is Louisville really going to, move on until Wednesday? And NC State won that game after finishing 9-11 in the ACC, and then went on, I think you would agree, one of the most unpredictable runs that we've seen in the last 25 years. And that is what makes March Madness so special. And I think when the great brands of the sport are playing at a higher level, like Indiana, like UCLA, we have a better sport to cover. And, I think everybody thinks there's a good chance that's going to happen this season.
So I was kind of born into my love for college basketball. My dad, a longtime sports writer in Louisville, and I could remember reading the Hoop Scoop when it came in the mail, and Sporting News, reading Mike DeCourcy, reading the newspaper every morning. How did you grow your love for the sport of college basketball?
March 30th, 1991. I'll give you an exact date. So my parents are going to be married for 50 years, knocking on wood right now, next May. And I could probably count on one hand how many times my father has put his foot down. And I remember my mother that night had plans to go out with like a double date with her college roommate and her husband. They were going out to dinner as a foursome. And maybe like 4 or 5 o'clock, my dad's like, yeah, I can't go to this dinner tonight. And my mom was like, why? We already have plans. We have a reservation. He goes, I'm not missing this game. And that was the game that Duke beat UNLV in the 91 Final Four, which ended UNLV's 45-game winning streak. And they were 34-0 that season, going into that game. Leitner hit the 2 free throws with 12 seconds left. And it's funny, when people talk about, the great games from your life in college basketball, I always point to that game before I point to the Duke-Kentucky game in 92 because of how invincible UNLV was. And we have to remember, like, going into that game, Coach K was not Coach K yet. He hadn't won a national championship. That was the first year that he won it. So March 30th, 1991, Duke UNLV.
You're not going to believe this, John. I was actually at that game.
I can't imagine what it would have been like to be at that game.
Yeah, it was incredible because, with Indy being just 2 hours north of where I grew up, which is in southern Indiana.
Yeah.
Back then as a reporter, you were able to buy tickets to the Final Four. So that was that year, 97 and 2000 are actually the 3 Final Fours that I've been to because they were close enough. My dad was able to get tickets. So I was actually in the building too for the last Big Ten national championship in 2000, which is one thing I want to ask you about to kind of start off here was, the Big Ten has had this long drought to national championships. Is this just a matter of bad luck? Is it something with the league in terms of not having as much talent as our leagues? Is it the unpredictability of the NCAA tournament? Because there's obviously been great programs within that time. But if you would have told me on the year 2000 when Michigan State cut down the nets beating Florida that the Big Ten was not going to have another national champion for at least 25 more years, I would have told you were crazy.
Yeah, I think that it's a combination of a lot of things. The biggest thing that I look at is just guard play. And is the Big Ten going to be in a position to have guard play at a national championship level? I was fortunate enough for a couple of years at CBS to work with Mateen Cleaves. So he was a wonderful, wonderful guy. And he was obviously the point guard on the last Big Ten team that won a national title. But I think if you look at guard play in the Big Ten compared to guard play in other leagues, it just hasn't been at the same level. Now, Smith and Lawyer were sensational, obviously, last year for Purdue, but we're going to find out this year, were they sensational because they were playing off Zach Edey? Are they going to be just as effective playing off Trey Kaufman-Renn? But also, you look at some of the other teams that have won national championships. I mean, Tristan Newton was a first-team All-American. Cam Spencer got drafted by the Memphis Grizzlies. Then we look, obviously, at last year. Tristan Newton was a point guard. Jordan Hawkins was a lottery pick. Andre Jackson was a second-round pick. Let's go to 2022. DeJuan Harris, grizzled college player, but Kansas also had Ochai Agbaji, first-round pick. Christian Brown, first-round pick. Remy Martin, somebody who we, watched, at Arizona State, produced at an incredibly high level for 4 years. 2021, Davion Mitchell, Jared Butler, Maceo Teague, Adam Flagler, and then obviously 2019 at Virginia, Kihei Clark, Ty Jerome, Kyle Guy, DeAndre Hunter, if you count him as a guard. 2018 at Villanova, Brunson, DiVincenzo, Phil Booth. So I think that's the area that we have to look at for the Big Ten to go really, really far in the NCAA tournament. But Alex, the good thing is this: there's a team that wears crimson that added some pop in the backcourt.
Yeah, you led me right into the next question. Do you think Indiana did add enough in terms of backcourt play going into the season to make themselves? And you never want to. I think the biggest mistake people make going into the season is, well, this team could get to the Final Four. This team could get to the next.
Right.
I mean, you never know.
You never know.
Was anybody saying that about NC State last year? But
no.
I think you want to have a team that can give yourself a chance to get to the second weekend, and then anything can happen. Does Indiana have that now with what they added in the portal?
I think it's debatable, but I think you can make the argument that Indiana has the best roster in the Big Ten. That doesn't mean necessarily that Indiana will have the best team in the Big Ten. Cannon Carlisle is somebody who obviously came into college, highly touted, highly recruited. Players make a big jump from the freshman to sophomore year. How big of a jump, we'll see. I think the role allocation for Indiana has a chance to be better in this sense. You're going to bring potentially Trey Galloway off the bench. You're going to bring, Luke Goody off the bench, I would think, at least to start the season. That is pretty good depth for a really, really good team. And I think, one of the things that I'm curious to see play out for a couple of teams in college basketball is how deep they play. One of them's in the Big Ten now. I saw them play in practice UCLA about a week ago, because UCLA's depth is without question the best that it's been in Mick Cronin at UCLA or Cincinnati. But, Alex, I was at a Notre Dame practice a couple of years ago, and Mike Bray had a great quote. He said, "John, depth is overrated in games and it's underrated in practice." And I think if you study really, really good teams, they are very comfortable playing 7, maybe 8.5 max. So I think it's important to have depth, because over the course of a season, this, people are going to roll ankles, people are going to get the flu. But how deep are you going to be? I'm not sure. But if Indiana can bring Galloway and Goody off the bench, that to me is like having 7 starters.
It's amazing to me that we're also not even talking about Bryson Tucker, because he was, the guy that people looked at after Liam McNeely parted ways with Indiana. Then he was the first kind of guy that added this spring. He's a McDonald's All-American. In a normal year, you'd be saying this guy could be a huge impact player, and he's maybe the 8th man on paper going into the season. That kind of speaks to the depth.
Well, not only that, but, Alex, I've been traveling all over the country in the preseason, seeing different practices. And the one resounding theme that I am taking away from watching all these teams practice is it's getting harder and harder for freshmen to have an impact in college basketball. And, one thing too, and I don't know how you feel about this, but I think it's something that we have to deal with in our sport. People want to have conversations during college basketball season about who's going to be selected in the next year's draft. And, well, this kid could be a lottery pick if this happens. What somebody is projected at the next level has nothing to do with whether or not that player is going to impact winning. And, I went back and looked this up. In the last 9 NBA drafts, 3 of the players that played college basketball, Ben Simmons, Markelle Fultz, and Anthony Edwards, did not take their teams to the NCAA tournament. And the last 2 first, number 1 overall picks, Victor Wembanyama and Zachary Risache, did not play college basketball. So people want to have, obviously, dialogue about, and I understand why it makes for great conversation about, well, this kid could be a lottery pick or he looks like a lottery pick. There's not a direct correlation to that and winning at the highest level of college basketball.
Right. No, I agree with you there. What's your biggest question about Indiana as we get ready for the season to start? Obviously, the Hoosiers are going to play this Sunday at Tennessee in a charity exhibition. I think we'll learn a lot about this team, getting an opportunity to go in there and play a tough environment against a team that should be ranked in the top, 15 to start the season. Yeah. What's your biggest question with the Hoosiers?
Will Woody opt to play a 3-guard alignment and try to only play 2 of the following 3 guys on the floor at the same time? Mkbako, Renew, and Ballo. I think Mkbako would be a menace as a small ball 4. I think that Indiana's rhythm and chemistry would be at a high level if they played with a 3rd guard. But in the conversation I had with Woody prior to the season, he felt that Indiana last year got good shots on offense. They just didn't knock them down. But I think that they would get higher percentage looks if they played with a little bit more rhythm with three guards. And I also think Ballo is going to create, significantly more opportunities for everybody to play in better space. I think that's the biggest thing I'm looking at, because I think Indiana has a roster built right now to win a Big Ten regular season title.
In terms of how Woody's worked out through these first three seasons, obviously he comes in, makes the tournament the first year. They barely get in. They win that play-in game in Dayton, then have to go west and lose in major fashion to St. Mary's. They come back the following season, I think they finished second in the Big Ten that year. They beat Purdue twice, which people were excited about. They lost to a Miami team that goes on to the Final Four. Maybe just a bad matchup for Indiana in that game. That last year missed the tournament. Have the results to this point with Mike Woodson and Bloomington been about what you've expected, worse, or just kind of?
I'm so happy that you asked this question. I love this topic, and I haven't had a platform to talk about it. This is what I want to, and you're there every day, so I'm curious your take. I understand in sports when there's an appetite for change surrounding, obviously, a very passionate fan base, but I want to start here. Tom Crean did a really, really good job at Indiana. He won 2 outright Big Ten regular season titles in 13 and 16, one of which came after he lost James Blackman for the season. And he also took Indiana to the Sweet 16 3 times. Now, I understand the bar is higher than that at Indiana. You want to get to a Final Four. You want to have a chance to compete for a national championship. But Tom Crean did a really, really good job at Indiana. In 16-17, which was his last season, Indiana beat Kansas and North Carolina and was trending, I think, towards a 23-24 win season, and I think maybe a 4 or 5 seed in the NCAA tournament when OG Anunoby tore his ACL. And obviously the team wasn't able to recover from that. And I understand there's frustration, but you lost a player who's making hundreds of millions in the NBA right now. And I think, Alex, you could look it up. They were about 13 and 6 when he got injured at Penn State. But they already had the wins over Kansas and Carolina, so they were going to get a good seed. So they bring in Archie Miller, and I understand why that hire was made. He was the hot coach who took Dayton to the Elite Eight. And, during his tenure, Indiana didn't play in the NCAA tournament. And obviously, they probably would have gotten in 2020, but nobody got in 2020. So Indiana didn't play in the NCAA tournament. So the feeling after hiring Mike Woodson, and Mike Woodson told me this the day that he was hired, he wanted to bridge the gap and bring, obviously Indiana back together because he has such, great ties to Coach Knight. And Mike Woodson went to the NCAA tournament in 2 of his first 3 years. He won the game, which you mentioned, against Wyoming. He won a game, then he lost to a Final Four team in Miami. And last year, Indiana did lose a key piece in Xavier Johnson to an injury, and I understand it was disappointing, but given his body of work, hasn't he, when he's had a healthy roster, put Indiana in position to be nationally relevant? Like, this is all my perspective, as somebody who covers the game nationally. Because, people at Indiana weren't, happy that, Indiana wasn't making the tournament in the previous regime. They hire Mike Woodson. He goes 2 for 2. And I think you would agree, if they had Xavier Johnson all season, I don't know what the seed would have been, but I think they would have found their way into the NCAA tournament. So
would have been much closer. Much closer.
Yeah. So that is my perspective as we dissect right now the last 3 Indiana coaching regimes.
Yeah, I would say with Woodson specifically, I was saying this after his first 2 seasons. I think the biggest thing he brought was some stability to the program, making the tournament in 2 straight years. That was kind of the problem with Crean. It would be like a really good year or 2, and then it would be a step back. And I think Indiana fans, they just want a chance to be in the tournament every year. I don't think there's an unrealistic expectation of we've got to go to an Elite Eight or a Final Four. They haven't been to one since 2002. So I think making the tournament every year is important. Last year was a step back. I think some of the animosity, I guess you want to call it, from the fan base with Woody towards the end of the season had to do with just kind of some of the comments that he made towards the fan base at senior day and the true fans comment. I don't know if you heard any of that stuff, but that was kind of some of the problem there. But I agree that he deserves a chance this year to kind of get things back in the right direction. I think expectations at Indiana are always going to be high. I think the minute you stop having expectations, you're no longer Indiana. I mean, do you agree with that?
1,000%. And Indiana should have the expectation to play in the NCAA tournament every year. I mean, I think if you look at, Coach Crean's run, 2012 made the Sweet 16, lost to Kentucky. Kentucky wins the title. 2013, I know, is one that is going to sit with Indiana fans for a long time because they had a Final Four caliber team and they lost to Syracuse, and that's part of the NCAA tournament. But Indiana was a Final Four caliber team. 2014, if memory serves correct, Noah Vonleh's freshman year, and I think they missed the tournament. Now, I thought Coach Crean did one of his best coaching jobs in 14-15. That was the year they didn't really have a five-man, and they kind of played Colin Hartman as like a stretch five. And I think that team started hot and lost to Wichita State in the tournament.
Correct. Van Vliet was on that team. That was the year they took a foreign tour before the season, went up to Montreal and kind of retooled things. They added Zeisloff that year, I think. They just had a really fun team to watch shoot, yes.
Yeah, and then in 16, they beat Kentucky again, all without James Blackman, and lost to North Carolina. And then in 17, they lost Anunoby. So I think the change was made all because there was an appetite for change. But then, they went obviously through Archie for 4 years, and they never made the tournament. And now Woody, I think you're right. He's gotten it back to having some stability, but Woody's also never had a roster this talented. So in my opinion, look, I think it's going to be fickle whether or not you win a Big Ten regular season title. And, Alex, the more I do this, I'm not sure how much that matters. And I'm not saying it doesn't matter, but, I was at a San Diego State practice last Monday, and I was talking to Brian Dutcher, and he said, we finished 5th in the Mountain West last year, and nobody remembers that because we finished in the Sweet 16. So I think if you're an Indiana fan this year, and this is just my perspective, you can obviously tell me what you think. I think anything less than a trip to the second weekend of the NCAA tournament would, be a disappointment.
I agree with that. And I agree with you on the conference thing now. There's 18 teams in the Big Ten. They're playing a 20-game schedule. You're playing, I think, 3 teams twice, and you're playing 14 teams once. Think about the imbalance in the schedule.
Yeah.
A lot of it can come down to scheduling. And I've said that. I mean, people want – Woodson himself has said that you want to win a Big Ten title, but you can have a really good year this year in the Big Ten and be 4th or 5th, be 1 game out of 2 games out of the standings. I don't think that necessarily matters. I do think the tournament success is important this year. As you said, they have the roster to get there. One other thing, just in terms of this team specifically, you mentioned playing the 3 guards. How important do you think it is for Indiana to take and make more threes? Or can you win not shooting as many 3-pointers if you have Ballo and Renew operating at a high level inside?
Well, I think those guys are going to create more opportunities. I think that's the thing. Khalil Ware, while he was a really talented player, he can't carve out space like Ballo can. I mean, Ballo literally can move, opponents off the block as soon as he catches the ball. So it's going to be a much different look at the 5 spot. I mean, if you look at Indiana, I know has had Cody Zeller and they've had Trace Jackson Davis, but Oumar Ballo is a traditional old school throwback back to the basket big guy. I mean, this is going to be a much different look for Indiana at the 5 spot, but I just like the makeup of the roster. You referenced Bryson Tucker, who now projects maybe as like the 8th man. And they've got a lot of different ways that they can play. And, you have a guard in Miles Rice, who, again, has NCAA tournament experience. You've got some players back, which I always think is such a big thing in this climate. I know we all want to talk about the newcomers and the transfers because we're in this portal era. Bringing back guys like Galloway, McBacco, and Renew is just as important, or maybe more important, than obviously bringing in all these transfers, in my opinion.
The other things I wanted to ask you about quickly, you've mentioned you've been around seeing teams around the country. What Big Ten teams have you had a chance to visit so far? You mentioned UCLA, but who's impressed you maybe that you've seen so far from the Big Ten?
I've seen from the Big Ten, UCLA, USC, Maryland, and Rutgers. Obviously, I've watched Michigan State on tape, and I've watched Michigan on tape. Michigan played really well against Oakland the other day. Maryland is bigger and stronger on the perimeter, adding Selton Miguel, adding Rodney Rice. They've also added Jacoby Gillespie from Belmont. Derek Queen, I think, will be one of the more impactful freshmen, not just in the Big Ten, but nationally. Rutgers has two terrific freshmen in Bailey and Harper. The supporting cast, though, leads me to my biggest question surrounding that basketball team and how effective they're going to be. I think that's going to determine the season because, as we know, it's very difficult for freshmen to carry teams in college basketball. And then elsewhere, in terms of the other teams that I've seen, USC has great positional size. Their four projected perimeter starters, Chibuzo Agbo, Terrence Williams, Desmond Claude, and St. Thomas, young man from Northern Colorado, are all between 6'6" and 6'7". So you're going to see USC 1 through 4 boast players similar to some of the players that Eric Musselman had when he had those teams at Nevada with the Martin twins, like bigger guys who can pass, dribble, and shoot. And UCLA to me is obviously, I think not just one of the most intriguing teams in the Big Ten, but one of the most intriguing teams in college basketball because of the depth and because obviously they're a blue blood program in a new conference with a coach that's up until last year went to the NCAA tournament 12 years in a row, went to a Final Four. I think if Jaime Jaquez didn't hurt his ankle in 2023, they would have won again. And then, that was 2022. And then in 2023, they lost Jalen Clark, the National Defensive Player of the Year, and Adem Bona, and Gonzaga needed that half-court shot from Julian Strawther to knock UCLA out. So I think UCLA is a fascinating team because you have a coach that's pretty much built to coach in the Big Ten, but up until this year hasn't coached in the Big Ten.
What, in terms of just the Big Ten, what to expect this year in terms of teams that you think can contend near the top? We always obviously talked about Indiana. You seem like you're pretty high in UCLA. Who else do you like just in terms of the league overall?
I think you have to give the benefit of the doubt to Purdue because of what Purdue has accomplished, and they have players back. We talked about how important that is. I've been on the Trey Kaufman-Wren, bandwagon since he redshirted. So I think that Trey Kaufman-Wren will be an all Big Ten caliber player in 24-25. Now, he's not going to be Zach Edey. So how big of an effect does that happen? Does that make for Purdue? I mean, you think about Purdue the last couple of years, 2022, 3 seed. 2023, 1 seed, 2024, 1 seed. So is Purdue going to again be a top 12 seed in the NCAA tournament? We don't know that just yet, but I think the story, Alex, is the league is going to be much more wide open at the top because you don't have somebody like Zach Edey. We mentioned those teams. Obviously, Illinois under Brad Underwood has been perennially a program that's at the top of the Big Ten. Now, they have a brand new roster, and I've seen, obviously people very high on them, and I understand why. But until teams, and I don't know how you feel, until I see teams play that are essentially brand new, I'm very, very tepid about how high I anoint them, similar to UCLA, because I think they have so many new players, 6 transfers, and a McDonald's All-American and Trent Perry. But the Big Ten, I think, will, much like the SEC and the Big 12, contend for double-digit seeds in the 2025 NCAA tournament. And the regular season means more now because the Big Ten, much like the ACC, is only going to have 15 of its 18 teams in the NCAA tournament, or in the Big Ten tournament. So if you are a team at the bottom of the Big Ten, you don't want your season to end March 8th and then be waiting for the transfer portal to open. And that's something that I would think would be a sense of embarrassment for a lot of programs to not even be able to play in the Big Ten tournament.
This is a bit of a loaded question, John, but what are your thoughts overall just on the transfer portal and how it's changed the sport?
Yeah.
Obviously, you mentioned the transactional nature of the NBA, and I think some fans have the concern that that's kind of what college basketball, at least in the spring, has turned out to be. Where are you just in terms of your mindset on the portal? Is this sustainable long term? Does there need to be some rules put in place, or is this just how it's going to be now?
I think when this came up, it came through in like the 2021 range when the transfer portal started. Like I understood it. Like I understood why it made sense to have a universal transfer rule. And when it was being viewed as a one-time transfer, I was like, well, that makes sense for all sports to have a one-time rule. And then I kind of then said, well, if we're really going to have stability, it would make sense then to eliminate the waiver process. And then if you want to transfer a second time, you do a redshirt year. And Alex, somewhere along the way, it turned out to be a bad thing to redshirt. And I was going over the numbers, in 2018 and 2019, Villanova and Virginia played 16 guys in the national championship games that they won. 9 of those players redshirted. 4 were first-round picks and 2 were lottery picks. So redshirting turns out to be a good thing from a basketball perspective, but now we're in a completely different phase of college athletics because if you're redshirting, maybe your earning power isn't what it is with NIL. I think since it looks like we're going to have freedom of movement here moving forward, I think one thing to try to stabilize things that I think would help moving forward is setting a notification date. And what I mean by that is, how they recently changed things with the portal that it's only open for so long. There needs to be a date where players have to commit by in order to be eligible for the following season. So if you think about it, what is the portal open right now? Like the third week in March, like right after the first week of the tournament, right?
Yeah.
So if they set a date of May 15th or June 1st, where you have to commit by, or else you're going to have to do a year in residence, I think that would give us a little bit of stability. Otherwise, we're going to kind of keep doing with what we're doing where it's become wilder than the goat rodeo.
Absolutely. Well, Jon, we really appreciate you taking the time out. It's been a lot of fun to chat with you. Where are you actually right now? Where you mentioned you're on this road trip.
Yeah, I'm in New York. No, I'm back home. I was in Syracuse yesterday. I'm in New York. I'm going to be strictly in the Northeast now. I hope until the season starts. I'm going to see. I'm going to do something with St. John's today. Then I have to speak at Quinnipiac tomorrow, and then I'll be at UConn on Thursday. So I've been all over, but I think I'm in the Northeast now till the start of the season.
It's you and Katz and Phantom, right? Tomorrow night?
Thursday. In
Thursday.
Yeah, Thursday. In Manchester, Connecticut.
That'll be fun. Where obviously people know about your Twitter account. Where are we going to be able to follow you this season, like on air?
CBS Sports. Yeah, I'll be on CBS Sports, both on cable and on the broadcast side for another great season. We just released our schedule, this morning, which we're really excited about. And as you know, we obviously have more of the Big Ten this year and the Big Ten tournament and the Big Ten title game. And yeah, I mean, I don't. This is another thing that, again, it's very in the weeds. But for us college basketball junkies, I don't know how you feel about this, but I think some of these schools that were in the Pac-12, like only the crazy people like you and I are staying up, through all hours of the night to watch them. But these players are going to have so much more visibility because the television deals that they're associated with are going to be, so much more visible. I think that's another thing where people may not have had the access to watch Oregon or to watch, Maxime Marino on Stanford, but they're going to be playing now at 7 and 9 Eastern.
Yeah, it used to be I couldn't even get the Pac-12 network, so I was anytime I saw a Pac-12 team, it was they were maybe on ESPN or a different network. But Pac-12, that was one of the reasons for their downfall. That network wasn't able to really get off the ground.
It's sad when you think about it. My wife is a USC alum, and again, change is the only constant in life. We know that, and I'm pumped for these new matchups in the Big Ten. But it's sad when you think about it, and this isn't to disparage, obviously, the new Pac-12, but there was 100 years of history in that conference. Yeah. And, it wouldn't have been obviously the same, but yeah, and I'd have to go back and look at this, but I believe the Pac-12 had a deal from ESPN on the table and they turned it down. I mean, if you take away UCLA and USC, so be it. But if they just added San Diego State and another program, it probably could have had a pretty good conference.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again, Jon, for taking the time. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate also your enthusiasm just for the sport and how you've kind of helped grow the sport and the enthusiasm. 365 days a year, you truly are, one of the loudest voices and cheerleaders for college basketball. I think a lot of fans appreciate that.
Thanks, Alex. Appreciate the time. Always enjoy following Inside the Hall from afar, and look forward to staying connected with you through the season.
Thanks, everybody, as always, for listening. Thanks to Jon, for joining the show. If you enjoy the show, please leave us a rating or review over on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Podcast on the Brink.